is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 590. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, he's a man on the move. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. Did you walk today, Luis?
I did. I went on my first of two walks today. You know, it's mission creep. We're expanding the range of the program.
Really? You decided to take a second walk in the same day that you already took one. Interesting. Just going hard. Wow, that work ethic.
All right. It is because I ate some leftover pie, because this pie was this is the pie that BDM was raving about, that like I ordered from New York, and it was like this whole deal, and there was like a half a slice left, and I just was like, I should throw this away. I'm like, I just can't do it. It's just
somebody pack that freeze dried across the country. You're not throwing that last half slice. And plus, you said it was awesome, right? Like,
yeah, no, it was from the Little Pie Company in New York, and it was just like the sour cream and apple walnut pie. So with like a cinnamon streusel crust. Anyway, I'm going to go on another walk just because I did indulge, but that's still a good day.
Good for you. And before you do, though, Kaldheim Sunset Show is here. Boy, this crept right up on us, didn't it? I was doing my stream yesterday, and somebody mentioned about how quickly the full spoiler for Strixhaven would be out, and I was like, wait. Like, that's in a couple weeks. Like, we might be at Sunset Show time, which I routinely forget exactly, because we used to have a very specific schedule around when the cards came out for the pre-release, because we would know then how far in advance the cards would be available. And that has been gone for a long time. And now the whole spoiler content creation cycle works around when the entire set is officially spoiled, rather than any other, arbitrary event or date or whatever. And I can never I never know exactly when that's happening, but we've got it today, the Kaldheim Sunset Show. We're going to be saying goodbye to Kaldheim, and boy, do we have a lot to say about this set. This was one of the more interesting, controversial, different types of sets we've had in a while, and we're going to go through the whole thing today. Before we do, let's talk about ChannelFireball. ChannelFireball.com, of course. Look, I kind of always breeze over that you can get your cards and stuff from them, but you can get your cards and stuff from them. This is their primary mode of existence, right? Is because there's always these new exciting things that are being developed over at CFB, like CFB Pro and box breaks and stuff. But, don't forget, if you need Strixhaven, pre-orders are up right now. You can go over to ChannelFireball and pre-order Strixhaven. And, you can there's a bunch of different stuff that you can do. You can just get a booster box. Done. Right now, they're $99.99. You can get there and check that out. But there's also set booster boxes. There's draft booster boxes. The set booster boxes are $119.99. The draft ones are $99.99. There's the commander stuff that comes along with these every single time. And then there's even crates, right? You can get these. It's like a bundle, right? It's got a whole bunch of extra stuff in it that gives you a promo card and some sleeves and some promos and stuff like that. And you can check that out over at ChannelFireball. So look, if you're like, hey, Strixhaven's coming, and I know that, we've started to see just the initial signs of the pandemic easing ever so slightly in some parts of the area. It's still of the world, excuse me. It's still early. We don't have live events. That's not where we're at yet. But, you might want to get some of these cards into your hand so that you can be ready for when that day finally does come. Could be in standard still, or you might need them for whatever. Strixhaven pre-order is up and ready over at ChannelFireball. And while you're over there, you can check out that other cool stuff I mentioned too. CFB Pro has some awesome in-depth content that you can get access to. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can pay for CFB Pro, which really reduces the cost down significantly to almost nothing, depending on your spending habits over at CFB. And you can check that out over there. Now, if you do get anything at CFB, I'd love it if you'd use the promo code LR. It helps out the show, and we appreciate you doing so. It basically just lets CFB know that, that their continued sponsorship of LR is worth it. And that's something that, of course, is important when it comes to that kind of thing. The show is also brought to you by UV, the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. If you follow many content creators, you know what Patreon is. It's the way that their most dedicated listeners, viewers, fans, whatever, go over, support them. And you can support us directly on there. There's a bunch of different levels. It's fully transparent, and you get some cool perks for doing so. Luis, one last Kaldheim Crack-A-Pack before we send it on its way.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Oh, it feels good to have a real pack, too. Okay. Let's see what we've got here. So in hand, this goes here. These are these weird packs that are kind of backwards. I don't know why they're like that. First card out is Bound in Gold. Nice.
Oh, the third best white common. All right.
There you go. I cast this on a Planeswalker on the stream,
yes.
And half of my chat went, "What?"
Yeah, when there's a mode of a card that you don't use very often, it definitely can be surprising when you do use it. So yes, that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it's also, this is a type of card that we've seen before, a pacifism, or in this case, more akin to an arrest. But those generally hit creatures, not permanents. So that's something to keep in mind. But this is actually an enchant permanent. That said, Bound in Gold, if I had to first pick it, okay. I mean, you could do a lot worse. Not really where I want to be. Depart the Realm, that's the bounce spell. All right, Squash. I would take Squash over Bound in Gold. Where are you at on that?
Yeah, well, I would take Squash because Squash, I think, is going to be stronger in the snow decks, the blue-red giant decks, and even some of the red-white decks can utilize it nicely. Plus, look, you don't really want a 5-mana removal spell in those decks, but if you end up with a deck that has 2 Craven Giants in red-white, Squash is great still.
Mm-hmm. Draugr Recruiter, that's the 3/3 for 3 and a black, and you can boast for 3 and a black to bring a creature back. It's playable, but not on Squash's level. Broken Wings, saw a bunch of main deck plays, particularly in Best of 1. But again, it's not competing with Squash. Same thing with Skull Raid, Notvold Recluse, Immersturm Raider, God's Hall Guardian. Wow, this pack really kind of fell off after some really nice strong stuff earlier. Our last common is Annul. Yikes. Uncommons, Narfi, Betrayer King. It's a good one.
Yeah, I like Narfi first pick over these cards. No, I would take Squash still, actually. Yeah, I think that they're comparable, but Narfi is much more committal, so that's the tiebreaker for me.
Yeah, and Narfi's powerful, but was narrow, I guess is what I would say. Spectral Steel, this is the 1 and a white creature gets enchant creature. It's an aura. Creature gets +2/+2, and you can pay 1 and a white and exile Spectral Steel from your graveyard to return another target aura equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. What an unnecessary card. I think I saw this activated a handful of times in the format, but it really just wasn't a thing.
Yeah, it did not get there.
Here's a card, Boreal Outrider. This is the 2 and a green 3/2, and it's a snow creature whenever you cast a creature spell. If snow of any of that spell's colors was spent to cast it, then that creature gets +1/+1 counter.
Yeah, I would lean towards taking the Outrider over Squash because I think in the snow deck, the Outrider is a little easier to play, and it also leads you into potentially black-green elves, which is a deck I actually grew to respect more as the format went on. And it's reasonably powerful. Most of the time, your opponent's going to feel like they should kill it. Otherwise, you start playing creatures with buffs. I think that the Boreal Outrider would have been a card that made more sense to me if it didn't lock color requirements alongside the thing. Yeah. I get, maybe you thought the card was too strong if you didn't do that, but that extra hoop, it's not just that you have snow, it's that you have snow of the color of the creature, and you can only do 1 per creature. I don't know. It ended up, I think, being a kind of unsatisfying experience overall, even though I think that the card is still fine. Yeah,
it also caught people off guard. Because you could play it for 2 or 3 times and never really notice that because it just worked out that way. And then one time you can't, you're like, wait, where's my counter? But I agree. I think it's a narrow pick over the Squash. Also, the Majestic Steed that the Boreal Outrider's on, that's Elmer. So there you go. A rare is In Search of Greatness. This is the GG enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. And if you don't, you scry 1.
Greatness was never found. I never saw a deck that could claim to utilize this card in a particularly good manner.
Yeah, I played against it a bunch of times. It seemed to pull its weight. It's a ramp spell effectively, and then it has a bonus of that scry 1. that you can tip off, you can tap into if you need to, but it's a lot. It's a lot to pay a card for that, right? Like you really need to overwhelm your opponent. It needs to come down on turn 2, turn 3, you play a thing, turn 4, boom, you put something in and then cast a 4-drop or whatever, and then you're down a card. So yeah, pretty tough. Our land, by the way, which we do have to talk about, and we're going to be talking about a lot, by the way, is Snow-Covered Mountain. So yeah, I like between Squash and Outrider, and I think Outrider is probably where I'd end up, but I wouldn't be shocked if I took a Squash every once in a while there either. Okay, let's get into this thing, Luis, because there's going to be some soapbox action happening here. There's going to be some groan tests. If you could summarize Kaldheim in one sentence, what would it be? Remember, Wizards wants you to say like Viking, metal, death, rock, or whatever.
I put snow time or showtime, which really just means first, it just sounds good, which is all that really matters. There are snow decks or beatdown decks. Those are the two main axes upon which the format seemed to kind of end up.
Yeah. Snow time or showtime. I like that. That's sweet. I said always beholding and never tell me the odds because I don't want to hear it. If Behold the Multiverse isn't good, I don't want to know.
that actually, well, we'll get to that in a second, but that's the like broad strokes of Kaldheim. When it comes to the best archetypes, it actually follows that. 5-color snow, red-white aggro, blue-red giants, black-green elves. These are like the main archetypes. Like the black-white deck didn't really pan out, in my opinion. The black-white double spell deck, like it was. The way these things work is it's sometimes correct to do these things, but it's rarely like some of these things it's rarely correct to do. And black-white was one of the ones that's like rarely correct to be in black-white, whereas like every table had like a couple snow decks, usually like 2, maybe 3, a blue-red giants deck, and then like 2 white-based beatdown decks. So
yep,
I think
was
that
what we saw basically every time.
Yeah, so I think the snow, red, white, and blue-red are the 3 biggest. Little shout out to the Grixis Snow archetype that I liked drafting. I know that you enjoyed that one too.
I did, yeah. After we did that show, I started drafting it myself. Particularly with the emphasis on the priest, the 0/4 priest, and the ability to recur it and combine it with the -3/-3 removal spell. That worked. I mean, it was a much broader game plan, because Priest was a mediocre card in that it was sorcery speed and also delayed a turn, killing a creature. So it needed to be part of an attrition situation where throw the Priest at something, buy it back, throw the Priest at something, buy it, scale it with the game, that type of thing, because it didn't really act as like a pure removal spell in that it often didn't kill the thing the turn that you needed to kill it. But that was a fun archetype that I don't think was obvious. The more obvious is the Teamer Snow. That was kind of, to me, the premium deck in the format was a sweet premium, Teamer Snow deck.
Well, I mean, to use the analogy that we've used many times is knowing how to draft all these decks is just another, weapon in your arsenal. And I found that knowing when it was right to like lean into the black snow stuff, which I kind of got driven there the first couple times because of a more high rarity card, like a Blood in the Snow or a Narfi. But then I was like, oh, this actually kind of works. And so getting to utilize those decks and those cards in a manner that's, not quite as obvious as something like the Teamer Snow deck just gives you extra flexibility where sometimes black's open and blue's open, but the green part isn't open, and you could actually still draft a successful snow deck out of those cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something that we're going to be getting into deeper as we go through. We'll stick to this for now, but when we get to the big picture stuff, we're going to be talking about the snow and the way that the snow archetype as it ended up being, which was bizarre to me, the way that it landed with some of the cards that you really wanted and many of the cards that you didn't. How it affects things overall, because it really had a massive, massive effect on this format, no doubt about it. And by the way, you mentioned blue-red giants. I really like that archetype. I really like that one. Agar was awesome. And I remember one of the first drafts that you did, I watched, I think it was your stream, and you had like triple Agar or whatever, and you were just destroying people with it. And I was like, wow. Like we talked about it on the show that week, and Agar held up. I'm a big fan of that card. So that probably, for me, it would be Teamer or straight blue-red were my favorite. The ones I had the most success with, I guess. is what I would say. What cards were we most wrong about during the set reviews, or just ones that surprised us?
So certainly the two pieces of equipment that were present, Goldvein Pick and the Tormentor's Helm, also Raven Wings, all the equipment. It's funny how these things end up where most of the equipment has been bad, or in fact, all the equipment basically has been bad for the last 2 years. Every time you
Feels
run
like
into
it. Yeah.
every time you run into equipment in limited, it's been poor. So that kind of biases you against it. It's not like these equipment like stood out like all that spectacularly. Turned out they were pretty good. Similarly, 2 5-color cards, Glittering Frost, the Mana Fixer, and then Path to the World Tree, Cruel Ultimatum. Like by the couple weeks into the format, I'm first picking Path over most cards. It just ended up, yes, it actually was completely legit to get to 5 and 5 colors and just go for it. So those definitely, I think that they performed certainly better than we expected in the set reviews. Jasper Sentinel's an interesting one. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that one later. But that was another one where we wrote it off in the set reviews, and I think that was ended up being an actual decent card in the format.
Yeah, it was a card you could play, and that's a big step up from where we had it in there. Another one that really just didn't get there for me was the Rune Cycle. All of the cycles of the 5 runes. I know you're somewhat partial to the white one. I'm like not so high on it. Like it doesn't pump power basically, so I didn't really want it in my aggro deck so much. Not that it was unplayable, but I just never was excited about it. I really thought that the floor on these was high enough that we would still just be kind of playing them and then randomly getting some extra bonus every once in a while. And the fact that we could play them effectively risk-free if we wanted made me think we would just kind of always have these in our decks. And that just wasn't the case necessarily.
Not at all.
It was like that's a lesson that, I've learned. And this was another step in that direction, which is that cards that look fine, but don't do anything in the moment almost never can make the cut. I think the best example of this is for the number of times that Opt has been printed at common is efficient, cheap. It does the thing. It's instant speed. Like it's really super flexible. There's been 1 or maybe 2 sets that it's been in where you actually want it, where there's like a blue-red deck that really goes or something like that. And all the other times it's your 24th card. You're just like, I'd like to play Opt, but I need another creature and I need this removal spell and I'm not going to cut this sweet artifact or whatever. And these cards get binned, and Opt is way better than these cards, generally speaking, as far as efficiency and risk goes. And once again, we see that even these runes just didn't live up.
Yeah. The runes all looked great. They ended up being mostly pretty bad. Like I think the white one was the only one I considered good because there was some good white equipment and you put a Raven Wings on it and it does perform. But I totally agree that in general the rune cycle was not one that really delivered.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Do you want to talk about this now?
Yeah, let's bring it up earlier rather than later. It's the 17 lands effect is what I wanted to call it.
I like that.
17lands.com. First of all, if you don't really know what they're doing and who they're at, what they're about, take a listen to our last week's episode. Actually, we had Pavel on, one of the guys who works on that, and he's a data scientist, and it was very illuminating having him on. The main thing that I wanted to point out was like this was the first set where 17 lands was in full swing, where it really got adopted by a lot of the Magic playing populace. We're here, and how often do you see these conversations now kind of end up as, oh yeah, well the data says this, and it looks like it looks like this card actually performs much better than that card. And look at, there's a recent Twitter thread where Ben S was like, what would you take, pick one, pack one? And from his mind, he was thinking like, would you take Narfi or would you take Cosmos Charger, right? The blue 3/3 flyer. Mm-hmm. The conversation soon became, should you take the Story Seeker, the 1 and a white 2/2 lifelink? Because it has the highest win rate of all those cards. And that doesn't mean that the story starts and stops at like, what's the highest win rate when this card's in your deck? There's a lot of, factors. But I think a lot of us, and I don't know exactly where you're at, I'm kind of curious actually. When I see something on 17 lands that goes against what I think I now am wondering, okay, why is it this way? I'm not trying to explain why I think I'm right. I'm trying to trust that the data is more likely right than I am, and I should try to figure out what might lead to that. Because I think that initially I definitely had the initial attitude of like, oh, this card wins more on 17 lands. Well, I'm not sure why that is, but I bet you could maybe explain it with this. But now it's like, yeah, they have enough sample sizes now that I think that they're fairly reliable. And now I'm kind of looking at like, okay, well, how can I use this to inform my decisions?
Yeah, think I'm the opposite. Maybe not the opposite. I'm not where you're at. So the way I see it is we're at the precipice of a new era for limited. Okay. And it's going to be the data-driven era because we just have never had access to actual data before that of a reasonable sample that was consistent, taken by the same people. So it was the same way from the same app and comparable to each other, reverse compatible, all of the stuff that you need data to be to really get good info. And what that tells me though is that since it was really just like last set that they went through, at least to my knowledge, that they went through and really sorted out what is it that we're trying to learn? Like what's the bottom line number that we're trying to get from these cards, right? Because the very basic thing that people did, right, is they said, well, what's the win rate of the card when people cast it? Right. And that quickly is flawed, right? That you recognize very quickly that there's many cards that win a lot when they're cast, but they're really hard to cast or they're very situational and you don't cast them unless you're about to win. So then so they went deeper, right? And now they actually have, a number that can get you to basically, I guess I view it kind of like war, like WAR, wins above replacement. Like how close is it to the average card or how much better does it perform than other cards in the format? And win cast, but it's not just win cast. It's also, when it was in your deck. And that should theoretically, count for the times when it doesn't get cast, or at least, put a dent in that. But I also feel like we are not where we're going to be with our understanding of this data. And that you could easily come to me and tell me something that just doesn't sound right at all. And that like you could get maybe not a consensus, but a good amount of limited players going, that just doesn't track for me. And then we will find out later, oh, it's because we took the data this way. And that's why this gap exists, even though like, it really just doesn't add up logically at all that it would. And so for me, I'm in that middle ground where I'm like super interested in this data because I think it's going to be really useful, but I don't think that we're to the point yet where we have a solid enough base of how we actually interact with these. Like one of the discussions that came up from this set was the discussion between Clearing Spirit and the Intruder, Infiltrator, whatever, the 2/1 that you can boast for 2 in a red and make another 2/1.
Fearless Liberator, yeah.
Liberator, yeah. Right. And then that was a discussion that Ben had, and then Ryan Sachs did a big tweet thread on and that kind of stuff. And, I want to see more of what Ryan's doing there, where he's really trying to dig into the data to figure out, well, what's actually going on here, right? Because like Ben's take, by the way, what it had said is that Story Seeker, the 2/2 lifelinker, outperformed the 2/1 that can boast by a lot. Like I would have been surprised if it outperformed it. Like I felt like the boaster just gave you more than the 2/2 lifelinker. But if you would have told me actually the 2/2 lifelinker slightly better, I'd be like, wow, there's something I need to learn here. But if you told me that it's like 4.5% better, which is a big spread, like if, saying that if you're going to win that much more by having that card in your deck versus the other, then either there's like a massive gap in how we understand, I don't know, power and toughness or lifelink or white creatures versus red or some huge thing that just doesn't really add up, or it's the way we're looking at the data. And, one of the things that they did when they looked into it was, are we really comparing apples to apples because people take the 2/1 higher than the 2/2? Right. So like, how do we flesh that out when we actually go to take the picks? Because if it's just 4% higher than just take the Story Seeker is what the sort of baseline logic would lead you to. But I don't think that it's quite that simple. The cool part about all this, though, Luis, is that we are entering that phase. I mean, this is a big deal for us limited players. Since I've been doing LR, I mean, I felt like we were a big part of the second wave or whatever of applying like the poker logic and the mental, the human mental stuff to limited. This is like numbers, like actual verifiable, manipulatable numbers. And we just have to figure out how to actually get the information we want out of them. But this is like the most exciting time to be a limited player in my mind.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot to be said for this data. I think we're going to continue seeing the data get better and better. And I understand there's always a little bit of trepidation for people. They're like, well, I still want to be able to like play the games. Is this, does skill not matter? You can just look at this list. It's like, don't worry, skill's always going to matter.
Yeah,
like
Magic's too complicated. Yeah.
You're going to have to learn how to play the game, and if you don't know how to play it well, then you're still just going to lose, and you're not going to do well. Mm-hmm. But I think in general, the data is going to show more accurate. Like when I basically just am kind of flipped where now when my instincts conflict with the data, I try to examine why I'm wrong more than why it's wrong, which is not always going to be the case. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to take Run Ashore over Behold the Multiverse, even if Run Ashore seems to have better stats. Mm-hmm. And there's one also like pretty obvious counter to that for in that example too, which is like, Run Ashore is a card you can still get 10th pick, so it's actually just bad value to waste early picks on it if you can still get it late. So right. you do have to keep that sort of thing in mind. But as we look through these cards and we talk about, what was overrated, what was underrated and all that stuff, it would be impossible not to mention 17 lands because it takes up so much space in all these discussions nowadays, and for good reason. It's not because we aren't capable of figuring things out ourselves. It's because this is a new tool, and it's great to use new tools. Yeah, you should strive to do so. You
should do so, right? And we're going to be doing that on the show going forward. The last point I'll make about this is, what do I want out of it? If you tell me card A's performing better than card B, and it seems illogical, it doesn't bear out from what we know, and blah 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 blah, I want to know why. That's it. I want the data to be able to tell me, to be able to give me clues as to why. And
even if it doesn't tell you, it tells you what you should investigate, right?
Yes.
When I hear things like Story Seeker performs 4% better than Fearless Liberator, or Run Ashore is one of the top win rates for blue commons, it makes me think, okay, let me pay attention to these cards more in my drafts and my games and see if I can kind of understand what's happening here, as opposed to, before, which we're seeing a lot more change during the format now. And that's what this is a good time to talk about that. This is the Sunset Show. And Kaldheim was the format where I don't believe really in the draft metagame changing, as in this card's good on week 3 and this card's not good on week 6 and this card's good again on week 7 or whatever. I don't really think that's the case. I just think our understanding of the draft format changes over time. And Kaldheim, because people were digging into the numbers, because people were debating things, and it actually got us to a greater understanding of the limited format. And it's just great because it just means more often you see people talking about these cards on Twitter, right? You see more people discussing draft picks and draft formats. And I think that that's a really positive thing, even if we're still not, we're still not 100% sure how we should handle all this data.
Yeah.
So
it's cool. The discussions are cool too.
Yeah.
So what were the most underrated cards?
With that in mind, I think when we say underrated for the Sunset Show, we usually mean like start of the format. Mm-hmm. Like how did these cards fare in the beginning of the format? And I think in the beginning of the format, and to some degree even near the end of the format, Bergstrider was just not, no one had pegged it as like the one of the top 2 blue commons, potentially the best, potentially the second best.
But this was your fault. You do take the full responsibility for this, right?
Because I played 5 Bergstriders in week 1 and it was great.
No, because you never made the equation for me to a very large Frostlinks. If you would have done that, we could have skipped all of this, but you failed me.
Yes, I did. That was my error.
Okay, I knew you would take responsibility.
Elven Bow, still underrated, I think.
Yeah, this is a great one talking about 17 lands effect, right? Like this thing outperformed the red hammer.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not telling you that means it's necessary. I mean, it's a different card for a different deck, so maybe they're not apples to apples, but I wouldn't have predicted that. No. I've lost to that stupid hammer a bunch of times, and, you don't lose to an Elven Bow, but it keeps the other player long enough to enact their game plan or whatever, so that's interesting.
Run Ashore, again, another card which started underrated and still is likely somewhat underrated. The equipment, we kind of touched on those earlier.
Yep.
Those all looked kind of bad, but ended up being quite good.
What about Big Lindy?
Ravenous Lindworm is just an amazing. This is creature. This is a 4 green for the 6/6 gain 4. Turns out this is the card you needed in green decks. This is one of the best green commons. I like it. I like it a lot more than anything besides Cerul's Packmate, which is obviously the best common in a landslide. And then Battlefield Raptor, the 1-mana 1/2 flying first striker that wields like things like Goldvein pick extremely well.
And, we talked about these. I'm proud of us for particularly those last two where we said, look, I'm not going to start off by giving this card a big grade, but if the equipment's good or you can augment it, the Raptor is going to be a key part of the aggro decks. And we even talked about Lindworm being a great way to stabilize against aggro. It turns out it was just a great way to stabilize in general.
Yeah, I think that we have adapted to the last couple years of how limited cards are made. And, partially because we've made missteps in the past, but partially because we're people who put a high value on learning. I think we do evaluate cards like Battlefield Raptor very differently. Look, I know Marshall 5 years ago would have looked at that card and said, this card's garbage. I'm never going to play it.
Totally.
And me 5 years ago would say, yeah, you're probably right. But as it turns out, these cards are better than they look. And in this case, we were not surprised to find out that Battlefield Raptor was good.
Yeah, the funny part is I actually would have looked at that as R&D being tricky and trying to get me to play a Battlefield Raptor by giving me like the first strike and the extra toughness. And I would have been like, not falling for that. But this time we were kind of all over it. What about overrated cards?
So initially it's like starting out, Wither Crown ended up being a card people thought was playable and it's just not playable. Tuskeri Firewalker is a card that kind of continues to underperform. That's a card that compared to the other red aggro creatures is quite a bit weaker. It looks like it would be stronger than, say, the 3/2 haste, the Breakneck Berserker, but it's certainly not. Fall of the Imposter is a card people continue to cast, and I generally disagree with doing so. That's the green-white saga that gives you a ++1 counter, then a ++1 counter, and then exiles the biggest creature.
What don't you like about it?
I just think it's not worth a card. I think it doesn't do what it doesn't do what you want it to do very well, and it gives your opponent a lot of options in terms of playing around it. So
it does. I'm not as low on it as you. I just never played green white like ever, but I was always a little jealous that they got access to that card because I don't know. I mean, assuming that they have creatures, it does things, right? Like that's not terrible. I'm not quite as low on it as you are, I guess. I mean, it still kills their best thing at some point.
I don't think it's a very good card, and I think
you just think it's too slow, or what?
Yeah, I think it's too slow, and I think it doesn't. It doesn't give you its card back until 3 turns later, and I don't think that's worth it. Okay. I think that's just a little poor. Cosmos Elixir, I think the Cosmos Elixir was fine. It ended up not being great, but it definitely was not terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I have it in the B range, B minus, something like that. But we were higher on it before. Dogged Pursuit.
That card's just
utter
trash.
Bad. Wow.
It turns out, so this is the 3 and a black enchantment that drains them for 1 every turn. It turns out taking off the 6-mana activated ability of Ill-Gotten Inheritance was just the whole ball game. Because it's not like decks, don't want that effect like Black-Red, for example, but it just was not good enough. It just, the ability to speed up that clock was what was missing.
Yep. And that was, I'm sure your win rate went down if you put Dogged Pursuit in your deck. What were the most controversial cards?
Well, Jaspera Sentinel, the 1-mana 1/2 reach that tapped for any color of mana, but you had to tap another creature. That's a card that a lot of people think is not just playable but actively good, and it has performed better than I thought it was. Certainly,
me too.
I know that it's not like universally agreed upon, but I in general have found that card to be solid.
Yeah, I do not have it in actively good, but I have it in definitely playable, and that is way higher than I had it in out of the set review. I thought it was just trash.
Oh, totally. Me too. It looked quite bad to me, but it turns out that there are enough other cheap creatures. It's an elf. It's got reach. Yeah. All these little things add up. There's lots of 3-color decks, so it's not just good in 2-color decks or whatever. That I think Jaspera Sentinel does kind of do the thing that you want it to do. So overall, I think that this card ended up making it.
What about Bloodsky Berserker?
So This is actually one of the initial things that really kind of started this discussion that we were having, me and Ben. Mm-hmm. And we still haven't really gotten to exactly, I think, an understanding there in terms of where it fits. But this card looked good to me. Like I thought this was a good card. Turns out I just don't think it's a very good card. I think it just really routinely performs quite poorly. And there are some defenses of the card, like, hey, in black green, it can be good as like your turn 4 or 5 play, because that deck has a lot of cheap spells. In red black aggro, you can sometimes string together turns involving like Tormenting Helm or Fearless Pup or whatever. But overall, this card looked like an uncommon payoff. Those tend to be high picks. It was quite a bit shorter than that, as it turns out.
And you don't like. I remember I mentioned it briefly, and you kind of snapped me off about it in black white.
Yeah, I just really am not a believer in black white being a playable deck.
Okay, that's fair. If you just don't think black white, then there's nothing you can, because I have had black white decks do well. I realized that I ran extremely hot at the beginning of the format by drafting it once or twice and getting basically multiple Bloodsky Berserkers and multiple Clearing Spirits. And if you don't have that, the deck is completely bad. And when you do have that, it's okay. Like it can compete with a decent deck. That's about the best you're going to get. But Bloodsky Berserker's excellent in that scenario. It's just, it doesn't come together like that. It's a very, very inconsistent deck. And, not to go too deep on black white, but the issue ended up being that it requires you to have certain cards at a certain time to play them in a certain order. And if you don't, the deck is very low powered. And other decks take none of that risk on and have the same power level or even higher. So why are you trying to fight this thing where it's not like if you curve out perfectly, you just win anyway. Sometimes they just kill your Bloodsky Berserker and you've got, a 2/2, a 3/2 and a 1/1 or something. And you're like, what am I doing with my life? That happens too much, but yeah. What other, controversial cards?
Waking the Trolls was one that a lot of people I think thought was too slow. Turns out the format lends itself to this being one of the stronger cards, and sealed especially. It was just obscene.
God, I loved this card.
But I always was really happy casting this card.
Me too. This actually was on my short list for my favorite card in the format. Like I actually was looking at this and a couple of others as like this card. It just did not like. It did just enough to be really awesome without feeling broken. Right. And it let you do some stuff that feels really good, like blow up and steal your opponent's lands is a kind of a great feeling.
Yeah. So those are some of the more controversial cards as it turned out.
What was the favorite artwork from the set for you?
I liked Faceless Haven by Titus Lunter. It's this creepy like Elk Lodge sort of deal. Part of it is I've spent a lot of time looking at the card because it's just a heavily played standard card and I've played a lot with it. But the art is something that evokes good things. I think that's a real sweet piece of art.
Yeah, for me, it's really tough because any set that has sagas in it, I really love the vertical art, and there was some amazing stuff in this set. But I decided to go with the piece of artwork that stood out to me as like the most evocative and the one that kind of stuck in my head the most, and that's Blood on the Snow by Martina Fekova. Dude, that is some harrowing, creepy, like there's a dude that just got shot by some arrows. He's going to fall down, I think. it is like, man, that is some cold artwork. And I think it was very successful. Like it really showed the kind of desolation there. And I like that a lot. What were the best build around cards in the set? Interestingly, this was not a build around focus set so much. There was a lot of synergies, but fewer of the card that just says like, do this one thing a whole bunch of times and I'll pay you off. That wasn't as much of a thing.
Yeah, it was funny looking at the cards and trying to figure out, okay, what were the actual build arounds in this set, because I think that in general, it was not that there was that many signpost uncommons. Like if we went back and look at all the signpost uncommons,
of which there were double as many as we're used to, because they had the whole cycle of the legendary creatures, and then
it just
also
didn't
the
really
sagas.
Turn out like that. You didn't really have decks based around that. So like Runeforge Champion definitely made runes into some good stuff. You had stuff like the Furia, the Judge of Valor, the black white one.
Yep.
And you had a bunch of snow payoffs that also like kind of did their thing, but this is not a set I would say is dominated by build-arounds in that sense.
Yeah, and then some of the ones that were true build-arounds whiffed real hard. The one that comes to mind is Dream Devourer. That's the 1 in a black 0/3. Each non-land card in your hand without foretell has foretell. Its foretell cast is equal to its mana cost reduced by 2. And then whenever you foretell a card, this guy gets +2/+0. There's some type of engine machine that's supposed to go off here, and that card just always felt like it was stinky.
Yeah.
And bad. So lots of synergy, little light on the build arounds here. So nothing that really stood out there.
Yeah. Maybe Herald Unites the Elves. That was a pretty solid payoff for being an Elves. I guess I would not discount that one.
Yeah. Cause it's funny. Cause when I think of the cards that I actually built my decks around, they're not traditional build arounds. Like one of the ones that comes to mind for me, in fact, on the stream this week, I did this was Tergrid Shadow, right? Not a great Magic card. It didn't really perform that well, but I did try to build around it a few times to take advantage. That's the one that has each player sacrifice 2 creatures by either, playing a relatively creature light deck or playing expendable creatures like Elderfang Disciple and stuff like that. You could try to do that, but these aren't what we really think about when we talk about build around cards.
Yeah, I agree.
Was this a Prince or a Pauper set?
I think this is a Pauper set. The commons were extremely strong. You had a lot of reasons to be drafting, commons and you didn't feel bad when you ended a draft and had very few rares in your deck.
Yeah. It's funny because there were absolutely bombs in the set, right? There was no shortage of those. There was some, kind of our classic, like unbeatable super bomb type stuff, but it didn't feel that those were what ruled the day. I agree with you. That this was dude, we were like second picking Snowlands. Like this is a Pauper set. Like you're going all the way down to just picking. Even Snow Basics were high picks in some decks. So there you go. What was the "It's a bad card, but I love it anyway" award winner?
I like Priest of the Haunted Edge. I mean, we did talk earlier about like where that card fit in, but I don't think it was a good card. I think it was a card you could make use of in some decks, and like it could be a good part of your plan. But I liked drafting those decks, I think, a little bit more than I should have in terms of how good they were.
Yeah, I always took strategic planning too much. Like, not that I love it or anything, but I would run that card. And
strategic planning. Oh yeah, that was that.
It is in the set. I know it's that bad, Luis.
Is that in the set?
It's that bad. It's in the set, and you didn't even know. It's so bad. All right. So what was my opponent played this, so now I must win or quit Magic Forever card of the set?
I think Ascent of the Worthy, the white black uncommon saga that
that's great.
Made it so all your damage went to you, and then that card. I think that card was just really, really bad.
Oh, actually, and we got to go back to best build around. Obviously, the best build around in the set was Colossal Plow. Right?
Come on. Colossal Plow.
Get in there.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right.
By the way, we just lost half our audience and they all just came right back in.
Yeah. No, Colossal Plow was great. I do think that was a really sweet one. I think the Ox Plow decks were really something. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, they really were. Remember that day when you and I both drafted it on our streams?
Yeah, that was weird that we both ended up there, but you know what? I'll take it.
It's the only time I ever drafted that deck. Also, that was the deck that was one of my that was a top 10 draft for me of all time, because that was the one that I had Colossal Plow plus the Ox. Like I think I had 3 plows, 2 oxen, or maybe 3 of each. And I also
had Coma in your deck.
For Coma. Yeah. And we ran it. So that was sweet. Yeah. So there you go. What about the biggest groan test? Now, sometimes the groan test is just when somebody slams a great card, right? Like Coma, Cosmos Serpent, something like that. But sometimes, for me, like one of the ones that popped up a lot was Raven Wings. Like there were snow decks where I'm like, point. I've got this on lock, right? They're never getting through on the ground. I've got this Narfi to block. I've got this thing. I've got a removal spell. So even if they, I got Squash. If they cast something big, I'm fine. And, they have a Craven Hulk and, the 3/2 haste or just some junkers or whatever. And I'm like, I got this. And then they go Raven Wings. And I'm like, oh no, like 3 turns. right? They're just going to start sending that stupid Craven Hulk over. I can't close out this game in time, and it's 5-10 and I'm dead, And so that was one of them for me for sure, was Raven Wings.
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest for me was Furia's Retribution.
Oh God, that's a good
the Black-White Saga that makes an angel, and then the angel taps to kill your creature and then gets double strike. Mm-hmm. Because this card was answerable, right?
You kill the angel and nothing happens.
Right. If they play that, you bounce or kill the angel and that's it. But the games where you knew you couldn't kill the angel, you're like, they just played a 4-mana 4/4 that next turn is going to tap, attack, and then before damage, tap and kill my creature. So I'm going to take 4, and then I'm going to take 8 the next turn. They played a 4-mana spell that hits for 12 over 3 turns and kills one of your creatures.
Yes. Unbelievable.
Like, okay, this is not realistic.
There was other cards too in the set that passed the groan test for me because of the way that they played out. One of them was Showdown of the Scalds. Extremely powerful card, worth splashing, saw heavy play, wasn't just a Boros card. But the thing I didn't like about it is that, like, oftentimes they cast it and you're like, well, I am definitely losing to that in 2 turns. And I'll be over here waiting to die to your Showdown of the Scalds and all the +1/+1 counters that come raining down on your creatures. Another one are just like high variance and generally bad cards like the Trickster God's Heist. A lot of times people play the Trickster's God Heist and it didn't do anything. And you're like, wow, that was a mistake. I wouldn't have put that in my deck, but power on you. And then sometimes they're like, give you a 1/1, take your whatever, and you're like, oh my God, like I just lost this game to the Trickster God's Heist.
I got a coma stolen with Trickster God's Heist.
Oh God, I can't. I'm sorry, Luis, I can't go there. That's the worst. Now, if you want to talk, not our definition of groan test, like with a little bit of a wrinkle, but just the card that you're like, are you effing serious right now? It was Starnheim Unleashed. Like, somebody played that and it turned a game into not a game anymore.
I mean, it was the highest win rate card in the format, like at least at Mythic. I guess I don't know if there was a higher win rate card overall, but I think it was the highest win rate card in the format.
Well, I'm sure that Story Seeker is like 4% better than it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Speaking of, what was the most frustrating bad card to lose to, or maybe just a card you won't miss playing against or that annoyed you? For me, it was Trickster God's Heist, because if it went, you felt robbed because they stole your creature and they shouldn't have had that card in their deck, air quotes. and then every time it didn't, you're just like, LOL, it doesn't do anything. What about for you?
For me, both Frostpeak Yeti and Dogged Pursuit were the kind of cards that aren't good, but you would play them or play against them, because I would not put these cards in our deck, and they would slowly and inexorably be killing you. It's not a good deal to make this 3/3 unblockable every turn. But I'm at 9 and you're attacking me with it, so man, this does not feel good.
Yeah. By the way, opponent, if I had removal, that
exactly.
What was the bombiest bomb, the card you hope to open? It's funny because there's a bunch of really powerful cards. We talked about a few of them, cards like Coma and Furia's Retribution. But this answer was not close, Luis. Like there was really only one card you wanted to see more than any other.
Yeah, that was Starnheim Unleashed.
Yeah.
It was just good against removal, good one behind, good one ahead, splashable, only cost a single white. Like, you couldn't compete with this card. This was the mythic rare of the set.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 1 was Starnheim Unleashed. Okay, now this, to me, is one of the biggest testaments how interesting this format was. What's the best common for each color? And by the way, good luck with this, right? Like, not only do we have 17 lands data now, but we also, like, even before that, this was hard. Like, I still don't exactly know what the best ones are. Right.
So for white, I think that Battlefield Raptor and Story Seeker can both lay claim to that above Bounding Gold. My money is actually slightly more on Battlefield Raptor. I just think that card is so integral to the white decks that actually win. Mm-hmm. But early in the draft, maybe you should still just take the Bounding Gold, because that ends up being good no matter what kind of white deck you go into.
See, that's kind of my take, is that the way that we interpret data about win percentages is the part that we need to fill in still. Because early, I am taking Bounding Gold over Story Seeker, because you can get Story Seekers later. Like, even if it is just legitimately straight up, you take out every other factor and the Story Seeker's better, people don't know that yet. And, you can take advantage of that. I mean, that's the whole point of draft. But I think the Battlefield Raptor is better than either of the other. I just think it's the card you wanted in the white aggressive decks more than the others.
Yeah, it changed from a card where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try to take this card or try to wheel this card to, yeah, I'm gonna just take this card because it's that important to my deck, you know.
Mm-hmm. This is a tough one. What about blue? I mean, I know my answer, and I'm unwilling to budge on it. But
yes, I know you're going to take Behold the Multiverse.
Yeah,
but I actually think that there's an argument for Bergstrider.
Yeah, I do too. I think Bergstrider is actually probably better.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I haven't really worked on Kaldheim Draft the last couple of weeks because I had the Kaldheim Championship, right? I had to test Standard and Historic and all that.
By the way, good job on the solid finish there.
Oh, yeah. I got myself a 10-5 for like 20-something place or whatever. Yeah, decent little finish. But at this point, I think it's actually quite plausible that the best blue card is Bergstrider, the best blue common. So
that's what I think it is. I mean, we talk about affecting the board a lot, right?
Yeah.
Well, Bergstrider affects the board in two ways. Like it makes a 4/4 and it locks down a threat on the other side. And that is really tough to replace. When you compare that directly to a card that doesn't affect the board in any way whatsoever, if they're even close on, you know, efficiency, power level, or efficiency or castability, then I'm pretty sure that a card like Bergstrider would be much better than Behold as far as win percentage goes. But I don't know for sure.
I think that for black, the best common is does not compute, not applicable. Like black just is garbage. I think that Feed the Serpent's probably the best black common, but it's like,
oh, it is. It's a good card. It just doesn't have friends. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like whatever. I'm not interested. Yeah. Red, clearly Demon Bolt, nothing even in the ballpark. And then same for green, Sorolf's Packmate, head and shoulders above every other common in the set.
Best common in the set.
Not even color specific. I have Ravenous Lindworm second. You know, I think that
otherwise it would be struggle for Skemfar.
Otherwise it would be Jaspera Sentinel.
Really? Okay.
That's what people seem to believe.
Yeah. See, I think that you can get Sentinels when you want them.
Yeah, best common also doesn't necessarily mean common. You should pick one, pack one. Like I think Battlefield Raptor is better than Bound in Gold. I think you should probably take Bound in Gold earlier, but I'm not sure. Whereas, like, yeah, I'm not going to take Jaspera Sentinel over Struggle for Skembar in most green decks, though maybe I would. I actually am not even 100% convinced of that, honestly. It's true. It's rough out there.
It really is. But Packmate, the point here, though, is that Packmate, and by the way, going back to what we just talked about with the blue cards, Packmate straddles that line perfectly. It gives you a card while giving you board presence. It is exactly Behold the Multiverse and Bergstrider kind of split in half, and you get a little bit of both flavors there, and that puts it as the number one common in this set by a lot. And I think that is borne out by the numbers as well. This one I found very difficult, strangely, which is what's the mythic uncommon for this set? Because normally a card just pops right in my head. I'm like, oh, it's this one, right? And here, I mean, I made a list of powerful commons, you know, Avalanche Caller, Basalt Ravager, Clarion Spirit, Spirit of the Alderguard, Agar maybe, Svella, right? Like there's some really great stuff. Maybe Spirit of the Alderguard? Maybe there just isn't one if we don't think of it like that. Like if there isn't one that's just like, damn, this should have been a rare.
By win rate, it's Basalt Ravager. So, you know, the decks that have Basalt Ravager are the most winning decks. Really? Yeah. But in terms of card quality, I think that Clarion Spirit is probably the best of the cards.
Yeah.
That one, it's very correlated to drawing in your opening hand. It gets much weaker later in the game. And, you know, Spirit of the Alderguard is also great. But here's the thing that's also, I think, you know, relevant here is these cards, you don't have to know exactly which one's the best one to know that all of these cards are quite good. And if you can identify that these cards are in a similar class, you're still going to be pretty successful in terms of what you know, drafting and being able to win games.
But I'm going to make an executive decision here, Luis. There is no mythic uncommon for this set. Like in order, like, because this isn't just about saying what the best common is or uncommon, excuse me, right? This is about saying what is that one card that everybody goes, oh my God, that uncommon, that's you know, the zenith flare of the set, right?
Yeah,
there isn't one. At least in my mind, there's just not one that came to mind. So we are not awarding a mythic uncommon for this set. It's too flat, which, by the way, is a good thing. You know, it means that there wasn't one that was totally like, whoops, this got away from us. What was the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last picked?
Weathered Runestone has to be the answer. I don't think that card ever saw even a tiny bit of play.
No, never saw it on the battlefield a single time, not even out of the board. Sorry, Weathered Runestone, but you stunk. Man, you filled in this one, and boy, did you hit a home run here. What card was the most begrudgingly playable?
Yeah, Draugr Thought Thief was my answer.
It's just perfect.
Yeah, I think that the Thought Thief ended up being, not particularly good, but you could put it in your deck if you wanted to, and you would not be happy to do so.
Yeah, that's right. Really good. Easiest answer of the whole thing. What card will you miss drafting?
Behold the Multiverse, always beholding. I don't know. I just enjoyed playing with that card a lot. It was a sweet card.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's like I kind of wonder, are you supposed to just take Ravenous Lindworm over Behold the Multiverse pack one, pick one? I kind of don't want to know the answer to that.
Yeah, don't run that. If you're 17 lands, if Pavel's listening right now, I don't want to know, unless the answer is, of course, you shouldn't take Lindworm over Behold. in which case, I tweet away. But otherwise, no. All right, this is an important category, Luis. What was the LSV-est card in the Martialist card?
I think Behold the Multiverse, you could make an argument, was the card most like me.
Definitely.
It's fiddly, it drew cards, doesn't affect the board state. These are all things I like doing.
Yeah. For me, I actually had Bergstrider written originally, but I decided to just go kind of with my gut, which was actually Turgrid's Lantern, which was an awesome card. Turgrid was a fantastic Magic card, and the Lantern. But I'm specifically talking about the Lantern because I don't know. It's probably because I'm not that good, but I love cards that just define your strategy for you and then just say, do everything you can to make this thing work. And also, this probably doesn't. It probably shows I'm kind of a bad person, but I like that it takes a long time to kill your opponent. It's like this boa constrictor of a card.
Nothing wrong with that. I think that's totally inbound.
Food. Yeah. What was my soapboxiest card? Well, Jaspera Sentinel was definitely on the list, particularly after, that we gave it such a low grade in the review and it ended up being playable. But easily. And by the way, I may slide the soapbox over your direction because you ended up having to take the most soapbox time for this on your stream and stuff like that when we weren't talking about it and on Twitter and everything. And it's Raven Form. This is one of the soapboxiest cards we've just had, period. Because, dude, how often were we getting tweets or messages in chat and stuff saying why no Raven Form? It was weeks into the format.
Or isn't Raven Form good? Or isn't
shouldn't you be picking a Raven Form here?
So the problem with Raven Form, it's kind of twofold. We'll just go over it again because it is an interesting enough thing to talk about. It had the combination of it was appealing because people like removal. They want ways to kill their opponent's creatures, and people often have this thought that it can at least deal with the 6/6. And it's well, yeah, but that's not really how it works. If you deal with the 6/6 with the Raven Form, it means that they get a 1/1 still, and you're still down a card. It's really bad for you. Mm-hmm. So Raven Form was not a good answer. It was correlated very strongly with losing. It puts you behind on board. It's not even that efficient. It's 3 mana at sorcery speed, which is okay, but it's not outstanding. And people consistently underestimate how much a 1/1 is a card. A 1/1's a very real card.
A flyer, yeah.
Yeah, a 1/1 flyer. Sorry. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's a flyer is very important, of course. Mm-hmm. And it was just astounding to me. Maybe not astounding is the right word, because at this point I kind of understand how Twitch chat and Twitter works or whatever, and I understand that these cards appeal to people, and that's fine. Cards get to appeal to people. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but yeah, Raven Form got a lot of press, and we had to talk about it a lot, and it was really not good.
Yeah.
Really not good.
And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but, say halfway through the draft format, people stopped playing that thing. It finally died out, and on near the end, I wasn't getting Raven
it's all the
Form
people who liked it ran out of money to draft with.
Thank God that's not our listeners, because they listened to us and they weren't playing Raven Form, and therefore they were winning more.
Well, see, here's the thing, though. like the devil's always in the details. Do you know how much I love heuristics, right? It's like one of my favorite things in the world. The answer to the question, should you ever play Ravenform, is not no. The card has a time and a place. The problem is I prefer to come down on the stronger side with things that I know people want to do. They want to play Ravenform. They want to put it in their deck. So when they hear, yeah, sometimes, it's playable in this situation, they're like, oh, so Ravenform's playable. It's like, no, it's not. You shouldn't be playing Ravenform. But it's like, well, but is it correct to play sometimes? It's like, yes, it is correct to play sometimes,
Yes.
And it in some ways serves, I think, our listeners better to take the extreme stance and then explain, hey, this isn't always necessarily the case. But yeah, the fact of the matter is everyone clearly wanted to put Ravenform in their deck, and it just was right maybe a very, very small fraction of the times that people did it.
Yeah, when you had 3 Mistwalkers and no other removal, okay, fine, run a Ravenform. But
or they have Coma in their deck and it's best of 3 or something,
Yeah. I killed a lot of people with the 1/1 bird. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
They some cases they even upgraded my creature from something that didn't have attacks on the ground, to something they could get through. Okay, this is the home stretch, but this is the most important part about Kaldheim, because there's a lot to say here. Now, it's interesting because normally this is kind of a fun question, but it's going to lead us right into the meat of the topic here, which is what card do you still have to read when it's cast against you? And normally this is like kind of a fun one that we pick out and there's some super complicated card. I just wrote all of them. I mean, it's not true that it's literally all of them, but holy crap, I have never had to still read cards, figuring out, does it check snow permanents or lands? Is it if I spent snow mana on it, like with Bergstrider, or snow mana of the specific color, like the Boreal Outrider? And it's all across the board all the time. What you have to read cards constantly. And that's because this was hands down the most complicated expert level set or regular release set or whatever you want to call it that we've had since I've been doing the podcast. And, and that's freaking 10 years or whatever, right? I mean, that is forever. And this is easily the one, it is literally the most complicated in the sense that it has the most text of any, more rules text than any other set we've done, but it also felt that way. It wasn't just repeated rules text that was true across the board. It was wrinkles within the same rule space that made it difficult to remember what everything did. And so with that in mind, let's get to the big question. So from a design and development aspect, how did this set fare? How are the mechanics? And what were some of the wins and the losses?
Well, I think one of my biggest criticisms of the set, certainly to just, start where you left off, is the complexity was high and they took away a lot of the normal shortcuts. Because when you look at a card like, a Port of Carfell, the blue-black land, okay, well, you can activate it at instant speed, but it puts the creature into play tapped. Okay, I understand why that is. They tend to do that so that you can't ambush your opponent's creatures, so they don't have to look at all of your lands before they attack, because that's an unfun experience, right? You attack your opponent, they're like, all right, sack my land, put a 5/5 into play. And you're like, ugh. And here's why on the board tricks, we make such a big deal out of them, and Magic designers, should make such a big deal out of them. If I attack you with a 3/3, you block with a 2/2 and cast a Giant Growth to make your creature a 5/5. I might not be happy that I lost my creature, but I don't feel like an idiot, right? You cast a card from your hand. I didn't know you had that card in your hand. And especially if I'm someone who is more likely to get frustrated in a game of Magic, which is to say someone who hasn't played 10 million games, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that you could have a Giant Growth, and I didn't feel like I could have figured it out. Whereas you, Marshall, Sutcliffe, there's a lot of those situations where you'll attack into it and think, oh, I actually could have figured out they had Giant Growth because of how they tapped their mana turn 3 or whatever. But
true.
You can set all that aside. When you attack with a 3/3 and I say, all right, I'll tap my land and put a 4/4 into play and block, and you're like, oh, I had all that information. Wow, I'm an idiot. That's the kind of thing that makes people not want to keep playing. And there's a reason that we more often see first strike creatures that only have first strike when attacking, right? Because it reduces some of the onboard trickiness, and also first strike stacks poorly defensively. 3 2/1s with first strike can hold off a 6/6 with no penalty. So okay, that's why Port of Carfell works that way. But what about Great Hall of Starnheim? Does that put the creature into play at instant speed? Well, no, it doesn't put into play tapped either, but it's sorcery speed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I guess not Volt Slumberbound probably puts it into play tapped then. No, that one puts it into play instant speed and it's not tapped. Okay. What about Skemfar Elderhall, the elf one? Well, that you can only do at sorcery speed because it's a -2/-2 trick and makes 2 1/1s. Okay, I'm kind of getting it. I just have to read all the cards, don't I?
Yes,
you do.
Yes, you do.
Okay, Frostbite. This counts snow permanents. Okay, cool. So if you have 3 snow permanents, it works. Great. Spirit of the Alderguard. This counts snow permanents. Great. I can kind of count, especially in paper. Tell how big this is. So what about Icebreaker Kraken? Oh no, that one only counts snow lands.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, what about this other snow card? And it's
the
like,
priest.
oh no, yeah, the Priest of the Haunted Edge.
Mm-hmm.
That one only counts snow lands.
Mm-hmm.
It's like every individual card, if you looked at it and try, see, when you design a card, you try to figure out what's best for that card, right? In a lot of cases. When you look at Priest, it's like, well, we really wanted Priest only to count lands because we think it would be too powerful if it counted other things, or we think that counting lands is a good theme for this colors, or whatever the reason is.
Mm-hmm.
But cards don't exist by themselves. And if you say like, all right, well, Priest only wants to count lands, but Frostbite, we think it's important that it counts all permanents because we want to reward people for playing snow creatures in their red decks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, and then for this card, we only want to count this. And for this card, we want to count snow mana. Only the mana spent. Bergstrider, we just want to make sure you spend snow mana on it. If you only make the decisions that are best for each individual card, you will end up paying some costs. And I'm not saying that none of these costs are worth it, that you have to make everything the same or anything like that. I'm just saying that they I think, in my opinion, went over the line in choosing, let's make each card work the best way we want it to make work individually without considering how all these cards work as a whole. And their end result is you get a bunch of very similar cards that work very differently, which takes away your confidence in being able to understand what your cards do and what your opponent's cards do. Even right now, I had to think, okay, Frostbite's the one that counts snow permanents, not snow lands. Okay.
Yeah.
It's it's laborious. Like it does cost you some mental energy. And I think that there are costs to that. So I think that that's a part where Kaldheim could have done better. And I hope other sets will.
And there's also the broader strokes complexity to address here as well, right? Yes, the individual card level complexity was very high, but also if you zoom out a bit, we went over it way back when we did like our first impression show of this, but holy crap, there's a lot going on here, right? It is not just a card level thing. It is also at the macro level in that you have to know in this set, like just off the top of my head, right? Foretell, brand new mechanic, kind of weird, hidden information. How does this work? It's not consistent every time about how Foretell works. Like Foretell doesn't always reduce by 2 and then you pay the difference in the original mana cost. And occasionally it's more, usually it's less, that kind of thing. Okay. So we're getting that. That's fine. But there's also double face cards. Okay. Those are a thing that you need to kind of get used to and understand. All right. Well, I'm keeping up. I'm doing fine. Then it's like, well, do you know how sagas work? Because remember when sagas came out, those were confusing. Those were like, wait, I get one right away. Because the rules text on it is so truncated that you just kind of have to have it explained to you about exactly when this happens after your draw step, that kind of stuff. So then you're like, okay, I'm getting used to that. I'll do that too. And then they're like, and there's equipment in this set. Okay, well, equipment's been around. It's kind of evergreen. I get it. Oh, there's vehicles too. What? Right? Like, I have to understand how these vehicles work if I haven't had experience with those before. Okay, this is starting to get to be a bit much. Now we've got an entire cycle of uncommon legendary gold cards that are not simple, right? Okay, well, throw that at us too. The lands that you mentioned, the uncommon lands, this is adding up a lot, right? And then there's tribal sub-themes. And then, of course, the biggest thing that they did here was snow, right? The snow was kind of a blanket of snow over all of this complexity, if you will. And, to me, they way overshot with this. Like, if I was a new player, I would just be like, I can't keep up with all of this. Like, if I'm trying to play limited. Here's the irony to all of this. It's way better for me. It's way better for you, Luis. This set never got old to me. It asks us to do stuff that we almost never have to do in limited, like take lands very early, prioritize those. play multiple colors often, not just 2, but 3 and 4 sometimes, understand all the cards and all the interactions and all the stuff. And it's starting to approach, kind of like a cubish level feel. But guess what I do whenever it comes out every time? I draft cube until I'm blue in the face. So this is going to make me happy. The question becomes, does this have a cost, particularly for players who aren't you and I or our listeners?
Yeah, I as you know, I disagree with the kind of where the conclusion that you've come to. Like in the
conclusion was a question here. Does it have a cost? You can't disagree with my question. You have to answer it.
Well, I can answer the question, but you have stated your answer of this is too complicated. Mm-hmm. I don't fully disagree that it's too complicated, but from what I can tell, you're at like an 8, and I think I'm at like a 5 or something. Okay. But is there a cost? Definitely yes. I'm not disagreeing with that. I think there is a cost. I think that the more complexity you want to put in your set, the more you should take steps to unify how cards within cycles work and how cards work such that you don't have to read every single card. Mm-hmm. So I think that like they have put too much burden on the players in that respect. Mm-hmm. But I also think that so I think that people have shown that they can handle some amount of complexity more than maybe what was there before. So I don't think that it's as dire of a problem, I think, as you seem to be facing.
Well, I think we don't know, right? Because I think that if you and I, let's say you and I were doing the show when Time Spiral came out, I think we could probably make a pretty similar observation that it was really complicated, but everybody seemed to like it.
Well,
the people on Twitter like it. Well, it was popular. I mean,
it wasn't.
It was though.
Time Spiral was way less popular than something like Kaldheim.
Okay, you mean in the community?
Yeah, Time Spiral.
I mean, Twitter didn't exist. I'm trying to say that.
I understand we don't have the full picture of it. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't do. I think that Time Spiral is like an 11. I think Time Spiral is egregious. I love Time Spiral because I like that kind of stuff. But I'm where you are about when it comes to Time Spiral. In terms of this is just nonsense. You can't make sets like this. Time Spiral did kind of poorly as a result.
Yeah, and I don't mean to compare them directly, other than it's the best comparison that I'm aware of a set that you can ask people. There's people that will tell you that Time Spiral is their favorite limited set of all time, and I don't just mean I could find somebody that does that. I mean, there are numerous people that feel this way, and it was, as a product, not well received, right? It didn't sell well, basically. And it was viewed as not as a mistake, but that mistakes were made or that kind of thing. And I wonder where we're at with that on this, because this has been a well received set from my eyeballs. But I mean, we're so deep into the Magic community that it's hard to figure out, because if there is a price for this level of complexity, who pays it?
Yeah, so I think that there is the kind of thing where you need to be at a certain level before you start perceiving this as a price that you're paying. Mm-hmm. Because let's look at the kind of most casual you can get, someone who buys a couple packs at whatever big box store or whatever, mm-hmm. and they add them to their decks to play against their brother at the kitchen table. Uh-huh. I don't think the complexity hurts those people very much, because they add the cards they want. They don't add the cards they don't want. They play cards incorrectly and it doesn't matter. Not a big deal. And then there's and then from the other end, there's people who are really tuned in. They're on 17 lands. They're listening to LR. They're playing in the arena qualifiers. They're trying to hit Mythic. Those people, the complexity has a bit of a cost, but they're really into it. They're passionate about this. They've chosen to spend a lot of their time.
Yeah, you could argue it's a benefit to them.
Yeah, in some ways it is, because they're in the top couple percent of players. They get a benefit every time their opponent casts Frostbite and it deals 2 instead of 3 because they didn't know how to count it. That's good for them. Mm-hmm. At what point do you become good enough / competitive enough to notice how complex this is and feel punished by it, but not good enough to play through it or get rewarded by it or practice with it? I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying, this is something that, like, if 1 is the most casual and 10 is, someone like me who just plays in all the big tournaments and, has been playing Magic for 25 years or whatever, I don't think this hurts people like 1 through 3 or even 1 through 4 very much, because if it's kind of complex, you might still have fun, and you're playing in a like a low stakes environment, or at least one that you perceive as having pretty low stakes. You crack a box to draft with your friends, you screw something up, and maybe they just let you take it back or whatever. And if you're in the 8 through 10 category, like, this is probably just actively good for you, and you enjoy like solving these puzzles and being able to trick people and all these other things that happen. So
then this is the in between that would pay, but it's not that big of a people group.
Yeah, and I think it's like you kind of have to work a little hard to find someone who is in for the competitive aspect of it and is, it understands that they're making these mistakes or getting frustrated by them, but also not experienced enough or devote enough time, or just not even good enough yet to really be able to play around it, right?
That makes sense. Then what that leads me to think then is if that isn't a big deal, right? Let's just say that this thing was twice as complex as it is, and people could cherry pick cards for their constructed deck, so that didn't really affect them. And people like you and I would be like, bring it on. Most of our listeners would probably be like, bring it on. Then there's some narrow band of limited players that would be turned off by the complexity and not play it. If that's not that big of a deal, well, then what I'm probably misjudging here is that people didn't like Time Spiral for other reasons beyond complexity, meaning that it didn't hit because they had no resonant flavor. They couldn't get into it. They didn't get many of the jokes that the cards were on. Where Kaldheim, that's not true.
From Time Spiral?
Yeah.
There's a card called Ridged Q-Site. It's 1 black mana for a 1/1, and you can spend 1 and a black and tap it and discard a card to give a creature +1/+0 and first strike. Do you want to know what the inside joke is with this card?
Yeah, I don't get it.
There's a card from Weatherlight, which at the time of Time Spiral's release was about 8 years before Weatherlight. Now it's obviously like 20-something years old.
Yeah.
Called Guided Strike, which was 1 and a white, give a creature +1/+0 and first strike and draw a card. Now Ridged Q-Site casts Guided Strike. Guess what Ridged Q-Site is an anagram of?
Really? That was the whole thing?
And the creature, the Ridged Q-Site creature, if you look at the art of Guided Strike, it's like the same creature.
Oh, God.
Let me tell you, as someone who goes real deep on this stuff and was actually playing in both these times, I had no clue that this was a throwback. Time Spiral's flavor was garbage. It just was. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I love
and
Time
that's
Spiral.
not the case here.
Yes. Kaldheim, it's the sort of thing where you don't need to make every part of something appeal to everyone. You need to make everything that you do have something that appeals to someone, like to all the people, or as many as you can get. You can't win them all, but there's people who like Kaldheim because it's a bunch of badass Vikings, and like giants and
legends and gold cards and sagas
and snow, and they like I personally find the like black snow, like blood on the snow sort of thing, like the cold bitter night. Like I actually think that's pretty resonant and actually speaks to me. I don't know why, it just does, And then there's like people who don't care about any of that, but like they like the gameplay. At the end of the day, and I we're kind of bearing the lead here because we talked about the complexity stuff like this whole time. I think Kaldheim's gameplay is amazingly good. And you know what one of the big takeaways for me is? It didn't have very many archetypes. Black was pretty bad. Black could fit into snow decks in some places, could fit into 5-color decks as a splash. There was red-black berserkers, there was elves, but overall, there's people out there who correctly, I think, are willing to take any red or white creature that costs 2 mana over Feed the Serpent, the premier, supposedly, black removal spell. And that's like the sort of thing that at the start of a format, before you played the cards, you just never do. Black was really, really bad. Also, the snow decks glommed up a lot of the potential archetype space. Like, there was 3 main archetypes, though there was obviously sub-archetypes and all that. At the end of the day, I think that the gameplay being fun is a huge, huge, huge component of it, and there's no easy way to track that. There's no number on 17 lands that will tell you how good the gameplay is. And
that is really the big story here, because I think if those other things aren't an issue at the set level or at a big group of player level, I would just call it inelegant design then. Like, it's just harder to get into, and it wasn't quite as enjoyable at the beginning. But as predicted, by the way, we talked about this on the show like week 1, and I said, we are going to like this. when we get over the hump on figuring out what the hell's going on with these cards in this set, because remember I said it felt like doing homework at first? Well, it turns out I did my homework. I got a pretty damn good grade, and I enjoyed this set all the way. Like, kind of bummed it's going away. Like,
yeah, I didn't mention this really earlier. In the average set, you and I are like, God, can we do the Sunset Show already? Like 3 weeks before the Sunset Show or a month before.
That's right.
Because it's like, we are done. Both of us, this kind of snuck up on us because Kaldheim is just that fun. I've done more Kaldheim drafts than any set in the past couple of years.
Same.
And like I mentioned in an earlier show, I just kind of trust how I spend my time, my gut in that sense, more than anything else, which is, hey, I chose to play a lot of Kaldheim. I think I don't really need to know the reasons why. Like, it's good to investigate, hey, why do I like this versus more than that? But at the end of the day, like, all this stuff aside, I just enjoyed this the most. I played it the most. And I feel, at least from an anecdotal level, because we're not like tracking all of this has gotten the most people interested and engaged than any other set in the recent history in terms of how often people talk about it, how much feedback we get, how much people, really seem to tune in, want to watch it, all that stuff.
Totally. It generated the most content for various reasons. It might be partly coincidental with the 17 lands effect that we were talking about, but this set will echo in eternity, right? Like, and even if you didn't like it, it made an impact. This set, you felt it. This set had something to say, and it hit like a meteor. And, that to me has value to it. That's interesting. That's something for us to talk about. That's cool. If you ask me in a year and a half about Zendikar Rising, I'm going to go, which one was that again? Right? But if you ask me about Kaldheim, I'm going to know. I'm going to be like, oh my God, Kaldheim. Remember all the text. Remember how long it took us to do the rare review on Kaldheim? It is memorable. And the replayability on this is where you get the payoff for the complexity. It's where the complexity becomes a boon rather than something that holds a set back. So anybody that survived that bump to get through and was willing to go through that is still drafting it to this day. And I mean, that's going to put this up into the upper echelon. I think the last set that I played this much and liked this much was probably Dominaria, at the level that I was like, just give me more. I just want more. And that the gameplay still felt interesting. And I want to put emphasis on the point you made, Luis. They missed on a ton of archetypes. Like black, red berserkers, LOL. Like nobody plays black, red berserkers in this format. That's not even a thing. Yeah. The black, white deck, right. That's just snow, right? And red, green was like, hey, it's just ended up being snow, right? Anything touching green or blue basically was snow with other stuff outside of blue, red, which was actually giants because the payoffs were there. But you said you kind of came around on elves. I still felt like it wasn't very good the whole time. The black white deck was way too finicky. Even if you like elves, you're not looking at it and going like, I'm going to force elves because it's just the best. Green white? Like, what? I don't even know what that was supposed to be. And it missed too. And the set's still sweet. Like, how did this happen that they bricked on so many of the archetypes and then just snow, like you said, was just like humph and just ate like 4.5 archetypes itself. Yet we're still playing this thing every day. It is kind of inexplicable to me that they could overshoot on complexity, have a bunch of kind of inelegant stuff that made it difficult to get into, miss on multiple archetypes, have a color that's not absent, but certainly lower than the rest. And we're still just going, I'd like to draft that. I mean, I got off of the Vintage Cube after it was done and went right back to Kaldheim, just straight back into it. Usually that's where I step away from a set.
Right. I was going to say, that's normally our exit opportunity. The set's been out for 2 months. A cube comes out, you draft it, and it's kind of hard to go back to the format. Yeah, not for me. And
super interesting though,
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, I would give Kaldheim probably an A- in terms of an overall grade. Like, there are things that I think aren't perfect, but at the end of the day, they nail the stuff that matters. And that's the stuff that keeps you coming back.
What if in, how they do those quarterly reports or whatever? Mm-hmm. What if we find out later that like this is similar to Time Spiral as far as like it didn't sell? Like, I don't think that that's going to happen, but would that change your mind? Would you then be saying more like, well, boy, the complexity or they overshot or something, maybe they really overdid it or they shouldn't? Would you give it a lower grade? Like, how would you, would that change your view of the set? I'm curious.
If I found out that the set was worse than I thought it was, or did worse than I thought it was overall, then that would certainly revise my grade. This part of my grade is based on like the information I have at my disposal, and the general, the tenor, which is generally positive for Kaldheim.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, also, I mean, we are the ones who give this grade, right? You're talking to Marshall and Luis here. We're draft junkies. We've drafted for, forever. And I mean, one thing that I didn't mention with regards to the complexity thing is I do think it's okay to push the complexity every once in a while, right? Like you said, not every set can be for every person. You're trying to hit the biggest swaths that you can, but that means that like, hey, there's core sets before, and those were for people that either needed or liked a bit lower complexity. Well, there can be a Kaldheim every once in a while for you and me, right? And for our listeners where we get to kind of go nuts. So I'm not against that. And like I said, if it's just me personally speaking, give me more. Like I liked it. I just want to make sure that our game stays as accessible as possible. Before we go, Luis, what did we learn? What did this format teach us?
Honestly, this format, I think, more taught me that we're at the verge of seeing a lot more data-driven analysis when it comes to limited. I think that's what we're going to kind of look back, and this is where this started, at least where it really took off. So this felt like an inflection point, which was more having to do with what's going on near the format rather than just literally this format itself. But I still think that end of the day, Kaldheim is gonna be the first set I really remember when I think of, when did we really start paying attention to like card data versus just us, what we play and how we think about things.
Kaldheim's going to be that set forever. What was your favorite card in the format? The number one for you specifically, Luis. What'd you like the most?
I liked Waking the Trolls. I thought it was a fun card.
Yeah, baby.
Obviously I like the name too, but in general, I just like, I don't know, blowing up lands is sweet. Trying to like ramp to the 6-drop is sweet. I thought it was a cool card. Getting it back with Master Scald was one of the more demoralizing things you could do for your opponent. So
yeah, the only problem is they scooped to it. My favorite card, I don't think this will ever happen again, Luis. We're both on red, green, gold cards, was Svella Ice Shaper. Yeah. Give me a game plan. Give me some mana fixing. Give me a nice 2/4. The only thing that I wish was that Svella was a giant so that she could make my squashes cheaper. But yeah, Svella Ice Shaper was my favorite card of the format. And by the way, we should mention it. Super memorable moment for you on your stream with Svella I was watching, or I should say with Svella's, as you discarded 3 of them to hand size in one turn.
Yeah, I think that's when I cracked my second Path to the World Tree, and that's why I had so many cards in my hand, and so I chose to discard 3 Svellas to hand size.
Just to see if the opponent would scoop. And they didn't last much longer than that. So there you go. That is the Sunset Show for Kaldheim. Really one of the most memorable sets we've had in a long time, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it for quite a while going forward. I'm also curious to see how much this pattern continues in Strixhaven. I want to know if they've got a similar design philosophy going in, or if it's going to be a lot different. And we'll find out the more we know about Strixhaven. That's going to do it for this episode of the show. We want to thank you for listening and hanging out with us. We always appreciate it. We also want to mention our sponsor again, ChannelFireball.com. If you want to pre-order Strixhaven, you can head over there. As I mentioned, $119.99 for the regular boxes. They're in stock. They're ready to go. And then there's also some cool bundles and stuff that you can get on top of that. The crates, they call them over there. And that can get you, maybe a little of that pre-release vibe at home, even if we don't have them right now. Might be worth checking out over at CFB. If you do buy something, or sign up for CFB Pro or anything, use the affiliate code LR at checkout. It does help us out and we do appreciate it. If you want to find anything related to the show, it's at lrcast.com. I am migrating the web host. I made an errant tweet where I said I was changing hosts, and people thought that meant that I was changing you out. And I'm like, what? Oh my God. I read my tweet. It was poorly worded, shall we say. And anyway, I'm changing web hosts on it. So the site's not going to be updated for a week or two here, and it may be down intermittently, but it is up and it will be up to date once everything gets moved over. LRcast.com, it has links for basically everything we do, as well as every episode of the show ever on there. And you can go back and listen to the set review from Kaldheim, for example, and see what we got right and see what we got wrong, etc. That is going to do it for this episode. We'll be gearing up for Strixhaven starting next week. We'll see you then.
Yeah, so that announcement wouldn't come during Twitter, as we all know. The sign off.
Don't start with me right now. I've had a stressful day.
Well, if anyone else is in the position of wanting to figure out a way to kill time before Strixhaven comes down, I do have to mention that I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone Battlegrounds recently. That has been my walk activity mostly, because the mobile client is very good for that. And it's a little auto battler. I know I've talked about it on the show before, but I'm kind of back into it again. It's a lot of fun. A new patch just came out. I've really been enjoying it. I might actually stream it. I think I might end up streaming a little bit of it too, just because I've been playing a good amount of it, and it's a pretty fun game. I mean, it's much lighter. The way I kind of interact with Battlegrounds is I've had maybe 3 periods of time over the past 2 years where I'll play it pretty heavily for like a month or two, and then I'll usually stop for a while because, look, end of the day, it doesn't have the depth of Magic, and you're not going to get me away from Magic in any way. But it is a good thing to play like while I'm walking or while I have 20 minutes to kill, and getting to like up to speed and learning how to do it. And then once you've kind of solved those puzzles, it's not as many new novel situations, but I do highly recommend it. It's a great game. It's well designed. It's a lot of fun. So I definitely wanted to give a shout out because it's something I've spent a decent amount of time on recently. I'm in one of my spurts of playing it again, but I'm sure when Strixhaven comes out, it'll be stiff competition, especially now that Arena's on mobile, though I haven't tried drafting while walking yet. That seems like it might be a little tricky.
I've done it. And it works. It's real bad for us, Luis.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure having, trying to hang out with Ben S at this point is probably pretty insufferable.
Yeah, I feel bad for Rachel.
Yeah.